Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Conversations Cafe. Ask Us Anything. We are here for another awesome week of discussion and stigma-free dialogue on mental health. I am Carl Evans, Senior Director of Operations at Hope of the Day, and it's my pleasure to bring you this episode. We've got a rockin' and rollin' show for you today with a great group of guests who are going to be talking to us from a number of different intersections. But as you can tell by the title of this episode, we've got a bit of a mailbag today. We always get awesome questions in from our community that we often answer sort of in a sidebar, whether they come through DMs or in a common threads on our social media platforms, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or anything like that. And we've always wanted to create an opportunity to talk about and answer those questions, not just personally, but we see a lot of the same questions, which is awesome. That tells us that people have a lot of similar concerns about things. And so we thought for this episode, this is really kind of one of the first ones we've done, sort of open forum Q&A with live audiences and whatnot. But this is the first time that we're really doing something where we've collected questions from the community, and we're going to be answering them with a great panel of guests, including two fantastic clinicians, plus our guests who are joining us from Volunteer Appreciation Week. So the way I wanted to introduce things today is we're going to be talking with folks who have stepped up to become agents of impact and volunteer with us and Hope for the Day and support proactive suicide prevention in their community in unique ways. And they have their own stories to tell. And then we have two guests who are joining us from the clinical world on mental health, who we've interconnected with at Hope for the Day through a number of different activities and opportunities in the greater Chicagoland area. And one of the things that these kind of episodes are always about is really raising the visibility of resources and being a bridge. We're not going to tackle the whole mental health conversation all in one go, but we try to take small bites. But there's so many different facets to mental health and different struggles and different experiences that it's important that we also raise the visibility of bridges and options, because people need different options. It's not just one track situation. And at Hope for the Day, if you go to hftd.org, we have an amazing tool that we've just started to bring on board that we call the Resource Compass. And it's important because you're probably familiar with, if you type your zip code in, for instance, into any sort of search engine, and maybe a keyword like mental health, you'll probably get resources that range in everything from direct services to private practice to helplines. But the Resource Compass is sort of a full spectrum way of approaching mental health resources, because it has both private practice and direct services and public access like hospitals and things like that. But it also provides links and resources and information for things like food pantries, employment support, with the current realities around isolation and things like that, support along those lines to help out with people who may be disconnected from services because of current realities. So all those types of things, whether it's employment insecurity or food insecurity or housing insecurity, can dramatically impact your quality of mental health. So we've got the good homie Mike, our education director, who's going to be walking you through how you can access the Resource Compass online. This is Hope for the Day's website. And Mike, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. So yeah, if you just simply type into your browser hftd.org. If you want to bring my video on, I could even tell the people in person. Yeah. We've got right on the front page, you have your local resources, find your local resources button, and that'll take you directly to the Hope of the Day Resource Compass. And this is definitely one of the best possible tools you can have, along with this Find Help page that includes international resources. But you see, there's a simple zip code box. So since we're virtually at Sip of Hope Coffee Bar tonight, let's use that zip code, 60647, and click search. And it's nice and easy, because when you know your zip code and you feel like there's nothing out there, this can help show you that there is some help is closer than you think. There's tons of different social services that we're connected to through this social network, and many free and reduced cost services are included. But so you have menus like food and a drop down in there for emergency food, food delivery, food pantry, etc. You have housing help, goods and services, transit help. Of course, we want to highlight the health section, because in the health section, you have the drop down of mental health care with a whole lot of things to choose from. So let's just say I was looking for some individual counseling. I can click on that because let's say I just want to use a professional to stay well. Like I go to a dentist to keep my teeth nice and shiny and healthy. I want to go to a professional to keep my mind well, so in a proactive way. So this brings up a bunch of different places in the area. You got the map view, and you can just scroll through with all sorts of different program filters that make it, even more easy to use, like a Swiss Army knife for finding services, social services in your area. So hope that's helpful to all of you.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Mike. And it's important for everyone to remember that all these different types of services always impact our quality of life and mental health. And there's definitely a lot of different things going on in the world today that might not necessarily register in your mind initially as a mental health, like it has a clinical diagnosis, but it all intersects with our mind. So, well, that's a great tool that anyone can access. Another powerful thing in terms of supports and communities is being able to help others and being able to join in the quest to sort of raise the visibility of resources on mental health, normalize conversations, and make this something that our communities at large understand it's okay not to be okay, to help increase conversations and get people connected to services. And that has to be more than just people like Mike and myself and Hope for the Day Central. That needs to be a sort of a network of individuals. And Hope for the Day has a volunteer system that we call Agents of Impact. And it's a way to sort of honor the people who want to volunteer with us, because volunteering can look really different depending on where you are. Sometimes it's working at a physical live event. Sometimes it's just sort of making resources accessible, such as lifelines and information on how to access it accessible in your neck of the woods. So this week is National Volunteer Appreciation Week, and Hope for the Day has enjoyed a very robust volunteer network over the entire span of our existence. And today we have two guests on who are featured volunteers, two agents of impact who have been doing work in their own flavor, in their own style, in support of Hope for the Day. They come from two very different sort of intersections, and we love that. If you're following on Hope for the Day's social media, you'll notice that we're starting to cover and highlight a number of different volunteer features, and we have two of them today. Our first individual is Christina, who's going to be joining us. Once I can make sure Christina can be heard and seen.
Let's give her a round of applause.
Hello.
If you had a sound effect for a round of applause, Mike, I don't think we heard it.
Can you hear it?
I didn't hear it. Wait, try it again.
Yes,
I can't hear that. Hi, Christina. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me.
And our other one of our other featured Agents of Impact volunteers is Kris Lundgren. Kris, can you hear us?
I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can we see you? Yes. Super. All right. So
did you hear that applause? Did you hear the applause that time?
I heard it.
All right.
Good job,
heard it just a little bit. So Christina and Kris, thank you so much for joining us. Wanted to start right away with just, why don't we start with Christina? Why don't you both have stories about how you got involved. And one of the things, if you go, especially on Hope for the Day's Instagram, in our Instagram stories section, we're running features and zoom-ins on these two individuals along with a number of other great volunteers. So why don't you, Christina, tell us how you first got involved with Hope for the Day?
Well, for me, I had attended a Beartooth concert at the House of Blues downtown in Chicago. And at the time, I was going through a lot of things mentally. And at the time for them, they were touring on an album that was completely written about the singer's depression and how he dealt with it and lived through, like, day-to-day things that he does to help himself. So during a section in that, he stopped and talked about Hope for the Day and about Johnny and about how everybody at Hope for the Day had helped him a lot. And they said that you guys were based here in Chicago. And then that really got me into like kind of looking up where you guys were, what kind of volunteer opportunities you guys offered, just because it's something that I needed at the time. And also that I've been wanting to get involved in for a while. So it kind of came at the perfect time.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Christina. And Kris, how did you get
Hello.
involved?
How did I get involved? Oh man. So surprisingly, it was 4 years ago yesterday since I met Johnny. I went to a mental health symposium, fancy name for conference, at Joliet Junior College. I'm a health teacher out in Joliet Central. And I was going there because I saw Garrett Rapp from the Color Morale was going to be the keynote speaker. And Garrett and I grew up racing BMX together. So I figured it would have been a great way to see him again. I didn't realize Garrett had a plan already to introduce me to Johnny, knowing that I'm a health teacher and with Hope for the Day's mission in health education, and having gaps a little bit in our curriculum for mental health and for suicide prevention. It was a perfect fit. We went on to doing an assembly at the school, and students started grabbing onto it. I think every computer for that year, and still to this day, all have the Hope for the Day sticker on the front of them. I've had students that have created events. They created Volley for Vets with me 4 years ago. Obviously, we don't get to do it this year because IHSA pulled all games for this year. But we started doing a fundraiser and an event to raise awareness for veterans' mental health and suicide prevention. And that would have gone into its 4th year this year. So it's just been a really great thing to be a part of, and the volunteering outside of the school and outside of the educational part of it have been rewarding for myself and for the ones around me. So it's been contagious. So
I've had the privilege of working a few events with both of you, and you're badass is all I got to say. So
Yeah, and Christina, why don't you? One of the things we love about the sort of volunteering system is that people sort of come at it and bring to it what they're sort of comfortable with. When we decided we were going to even create the possibility that we would have volunteering happen, we didn't want it to just be, well, go and fundraise, stand in the street corner and fundraise for us, but like, let's get you all involved. And people sort of bring different ways and find different ways rather of doing that. And Christina, from your perspective, how would you sort of describe a lot of your volunteer activities?
There's like, what's really nice about volunteering with Hope for the Day is you guys offer such a wide range of like different events that you can do. So really it's just kind of what you think is like the most interesting or how you want to get involved. I do a lot of tabling for like concerts or at different Chicagoland area events. I've worked like, the Hope for the Day mile run in Humboldt Park and everything. But I don't know, I just really like being able to talk to people about everything that's going on in the world. And, people are actually very receptive, or they're very
receptive.
Like, it's well received.
Yeah.
How we are so open about talking about mental health and everything. And I don't know, it's just really cool to see how people from different backgrounds are able to come up to you and just kind of share their story or talk to you about the resources that we offer to other people. So
that's perfect. And one of the reasons we're excited to have both of you on, aside from you being rock stars in general, is that you both also represent two very dynamic ways. And Kris has definitely helped out on live events with us for sure as well. But there's we found that as people come to us from different ages and different regions of both America and other countries, that they found that there's really sort of two goals that we're after. Sort of pressing the conversation and making sure resources are visible. And whenever we're doing outreach, whether it's at a concert or a live event that we're producing, like the Humboldt Mile, or it's a partnership with Live Nation and we're going out, it doesn't matter whether it's rock, hip hop, pop punk, country, it doesn't matter the genre, that's a place to sort of put up the flag and talk about our mental health. That's one powerful way, and people have found ways to do that, not just in Chicago, but all over the country and really all over the world, in which they can take resources that might be localized to them and put them at their local concert venues, do them at their high school football games, do it in their PTA meetings or at their local library with their elected officials. And then, Kris, you on the other side, talk about another element with volunteering. Another way people have found a way to get involved is maybe tabling and being out front isn't necessarily for everyone. But what they also love to do is find a way to facilitate the conversation, to sort of introduce or advocate in leveraging some connection they have to their community to open a door and bring the conversation in, whether they're doing it themselves or they're opening the door for someone like Mike to go in, or one of our other surrogates to go in, and you've obviously been a part of that. And so what I'd really love to know, and thank you for the efforts and time that you've all put into this, what have been some memories or things that have sort of stood out to you about your experiences? Do you have maybe one or two like power stories or experiences? Because it's one thing when you're at a convention for mental health or suicide prevention and everyone's ready to talk, but whether you're in a school or out in the general public, it can be kind of jarring. Someone asks like, what are you here for? What are you representing? So what have been some interactions that stood out for you all? Start with Kris.
Yeah, so one was I was in South Carolina for the BMX World Championships, and I was lucky enough to be able to represent Hope for the Day while I was there at the qualifiers and then at the actual event. But I remember being at the qualifier and I was handing out wristbands, and I was just kind of doing like some foot soldier work where I was handing out wristband stickers out of a backpack to different pit areas of all the different teams. And I had a dad come track me down where I was sitting, and he's like, "Can you come back?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't mind. I'll come back." And his son had gone through a lot of bullying issues, and he was a cutter. And I just remember his dad showing me, he goes, "Go ahead and pull up your sleeve. It's okay. It's a safe conversation." And he's like, "We're working on this right now, but you walking around and giving him this wristband." And he asked for wristbands for like his whole class and stickers for all his classmates. And he just opened up, and having that kid just feel that confidence and that bravery to be able to start talking to me was one of those where I'll just never forget that kid being able to open up like that. So, and maybe it was a thing that made him become an advocate to help other kids at his school. So that one really sticks out.
Thank you for sharing that, because that highlights something that one of the reasons we were, at Hope for the Day, we even had to think about, well, are we going to have volunteers, is because you're not clinicians, right? So we don't want to put people in a position that's irresponsible. And your job isn't to go and diagnose people or answer questions, but sometimes you are going to be an ear to a conversation. So we had to come up with specific systems to prep you. We couldn't just drop you cold start out there, but that brings up you do have the opportunity to have a powerful conversation, and it isn't done in like a dry, like it does, you don't have to be an expert to start a conversation. That's still responsible as a peer-to-peer civilian level, and not be clinical or get into the weeds of something that could be unhealthy or unproductive. And so that's a really great story. Thank you, Kris. Christina.
For me at the events, I do, like I said before, I do a lot of the concerts, the Live Nation concerts. And, with the different backgrounds of people that are at these shows, a lot of times people don't really like to come up to like the tent because, who wants to walk up to a table of like strangers and be like, "Hey, how's it going? What you guys talking about?" So, it's always important for me to just kind of like have a smile on my face, say hi to people. And we've had like I've interacted with like a lot of, younger people who are comfortable with coming up and talking to us. But I remember one time last summer, there was like a mom at a show who had actually come up and asked about, what kind of resources we offer and everything, because they're from the Chicagoland area. And she was worried about her son, but she didn't know how to talk to him about it or anything. So what was important for me and who I was working with is we had given her, our local resources, the international resources that we also offer, and just kind of give her like a lowdown on how you guys do like the Logan Square Library educational sessions and everything, because she wanted to be able to participate in that kind of stuff, in order just to be able to bring her son with her so she can kind of give him a little bit of a gentle push into it and see that it's okay to talk about this kind of stuff, what he's going through, because she wasn't really sure like how to approach him about it.
So that's awesome. That's such a great distillation on, when people say, how can I help? How can I be a part of this? Well, one of the reasons we want people to volunteer is because the most powerful thing you can do is be a bridge. This isn't about you have to have all the answers and know all the lingo and all the terminologies and this and the other. If you can be a person who just says, here's a place to start the conversation. Here's a place where you can go and find what's going to be useful for you, tools and things like that. That's so powerful, because that's just not something that's visible in our community, and it's not something that's consistently happening. And we need more individuals who are willing to connect in their community spaces, regardless of your zip code, and be that person, be that voice who's saying, hey, this is available. Have you thought about this? You brought up Hope for the Days monthly, when we're all capable of meeting in person. We offer a monthly workshop across the street from Hope for the Days Sip of Hope Coffee Bar. And we've actually migrated a lot of our education that we're doing in community spaces online. So every Saturday and Tuesday, you can experience the same Hope for the Day education, a lot of it facilitated by our good homie Mike, that we've been offering in physical spaces for a long time. And Christina and Kris, you both being bridges for people, whether it's they take the resource and they go and try and get help the next day, or they hold on to that wristband and maybe 3 weeks, a month goes by, and finally they come back. And we always see this at Hope for the Day. We always see this where we'll get an email into our info ad where it's like, hey, I engaged one of your volunteers, one of your surrogates somewhere, whether it's a library, a church, a concert, a place of faith, or just walking down the street, or at a weight room, whatever. And they'll say, I got this and I was thinking about it and I'm starting to have some issues, and where do I go from here? And then our job is to just sort of show them what's available out there, because starting this conversation is so hard for so many people. So both of you are that frontline way, much in the same way that we think of Sip with Hope as like our sort of flagship, first line of engagement and outreach. Each one of you have directly been a part of this effort, this sort of grassroots effort to try and connect our communities. And I can't thank you all enough for being a part of it. I'd like to know, before we move into our next guests, you talked about sort of stories that have stuck out for you. What's something that you've learned about yourself from doing this kind of work? You both had different tracks of experience. Has there been anything that sort of illuminated to you about your own mental health, about your own experiences through this? Christina.
I guess as how we're always trying to tell people that it's okay to talk about your mental health. I, for one, am somebody who's always telling my friends, like, hey, if you ever have anything going on, let me know. Like, I can, whether you want to talk to me or if you want to talk to somebody else, I can always be that person that get you help however you need it. But it's easier said than done. So whenever I've been struggling with some things, it's not always super easy to be able to like go out and talk to people that I'm like comfortable talking to about it. Because it's just it was weird to me originally, when I first started working with Hope for the Day, because, every time I volunteer, that's like the thing that I talk to people about, like, hey, it's okay not to be okay. And it's okay to reach out to others. But just reaching out originally was really weird for me. So been working on that.
And that's, one of the most interesting things about what you're saying is that that's actually a common experience with volunteering, is that folks will come in, with a head of steam wanting to reach out to others. And it might be because they've got things they've experienced, or maybe they know they've got some things going on. But outward projecting, there's a comfort with it. But one of the things that happens at Hope for the Day with our volunteers that we're happy about is that eventually, we don't want you to feel ashamed. This isn't about, it's practice what you preach kind of a thing, but it's not about feeling ashamed. It's about realizing, oh, wait, maybe there's a conversation I should have with myself. And we find that very consistently that folks find that through putting themselves out there for other people, they actually build an avenue back into their own heart and find a conversation that was hard for them to have. And it might have been hard if they were just digging away at themselves, outwardly, but when they start to put themselves out, they create this avenue in. Mike would tell you.
I started volunteering for Hope for the Day in like 2012. So I volunteered for like four plus years, got to know Carl and Johnny and was always around. And, I felt the same way, Christina. Like I had a lot of guilt and shame each time I got in a place where I felt like I needed to ask for help. And I just really wasn't very good at it because it took practice, like to unlearn all that stuff that kind of just gets put on you generationally. So even now, 3 years into working full time for Hope for the Day, there's days that are hard where I have to turn my wristband around and remind myself like super, super hard that, hey, give yourself a little grace. You're not practicing what you preach right now. So.
But that's also the beauty of it is that, no one, of course, is the no one's perfect part, but it's also the fact that like you're practicing the highest ideals of Hope for the Day's mission. If you're trying to work on yourself, if you can practice self-care for yourself, that becomes like one of the most like sacrosanct things you can do. And we enjoy, wanting people to go out and reach out to others. But as Mike will tell you, and Christina, as you shared with us, it's beautiful when you find that like, oh, you being able to understand the difficulty to start a conversation for yourself just makes it that much more easier to understand the difficulty others have. And that's the reality. Like, that's how we know that what we're doing, we have a clinical advisory board backing our education and things like that. But at a gut level for the lived experience, that's how we know, like, we're not full of shit, is that we spend so much time focused on trying to get people to start a conversation because it can't just be a billboard. It is really freaking hard to start a conversation. You can hear all the words, you can have the wristband, but it does take the repetition and it does take the comfort level. And Kris, what's been something that you sort of learned as you've gone through this? I know, you've had a lot of different intersections in volunteering with us.
For sure. One of the things outside of the classroom in using it with my students and trying to get them to become advocates for what they're passionate about, it was all about the thing that really got me with Hope for the Day was having positive mental health and through your self-expression platforms. And I'm not an artist, I'm not a musician or anything like that. I grew up racing BMX bikes, and riding has always been a huge part of my life. And just forgetting to do that and putting that to the back burner and forgetting about how positive that was to my mental health and to my physical health. But just showing how, wellness is a continuum. If you leave a part of it out, everything's going to break down. So in order to be practicing what you preach, you can't let go of that self-expression platform. And life takes over, we get busy, and sometimes you just got to make that 30 minutes or that hour or whatever it is and really focus on taking that time for yourself. Like you say, self-care is so important. And like, I know you guys have been part of this, but when I would do the outreach at the bike races, I would call it wheel therapy. And who knows, maybe something with that might come about, but we're hoping. So, but that's something that I think that we, in the time of our life, we let it go and we don't focus on that. And it's so important. I do a project with my students called the Natural High Project, which is another proactive substance abuse program I use in my health class. And so sad when you get a 15, 16-year-old, they're like, well, I have no passions, or I don't have a hobby. And I'm like, how do you not have a hobby? You're 15 or 16 years old. Like, think back before life took over and you got busy with high school. What did you like to do? Well, I like to draw. Oh, well, go back to it. Why did you stop? And I get it so many times, and I don't let them not do the project. Obviously, right now in the days of e-learning, it's going to be a tough one. But when they're in the class, I don't let them get out of it. And I'm like, if you don't have something, you're going to sell it. You're going to sell the fact that you're the best rock climber in the world, and you're going to make me believe it. And you might sell yourself into doing something, but don't tell me you don't have a hobby. Don't tell me you don't have a natural high, because when you sit idle, what's going to happen? You're going to allow all these external factors to start taking over. And that's going to be one part of your wellness that just drops off, and it's going to bite you. It's going to hurt you. And you don't want to let go of it now, because it's going to be harder to find once you get older and you start getting all these external factors that start hitting you. So, but that's the biggest thing, is just taking that time just to get out, pedal around, or even go for a run. I wasn't a runner when I was younger, but sometimes just running around the block, going do some stairs, it helps. And it's just getting out there and moving your body. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Kris, because that ties into another important element of all this. We're talking about volunteering and helping raise the visibility, but also being able to learn some important factors for self-care, and as Mike's shirt says, self-love.
Yeah.
Which the act of self-expression, painting, singing, and dancing is self-expression. So is talking, so is crying, so is laughing. And people nod their head like, yeah, of course. But why that's essential element of Hope for the Day's education output is because when we talk about self-expression, this is how we communicate our mental health in a lot of ways. If coughing and a fever and limping are signs of physiological unwellness, for our mental health, our thoughts, feelings, and emotions, how we communicate distress or positive experiences, but also distress, is through self-expression. And stigma, as much as it's a buzzword, it's basically just, it's the things we don't say, and it's the things that keep us from saying and expressing that stuff. And talking about biking, talking about BMXing, talking about physical activities, these forms have sort of given us a valve release. We're always talking about think of your mind like a bottle of soda that can fill it with pressure. Being able to embrace things that make you feel complete, make you feel whole. For some people, that's physical activities. For others, it's, it could be woodworking or writing or drawing, etc. These aren't just, well, they're fun hobbies and they're okay to do and keep yourself occupied, but they're also very much impactful and constructive to your overall well-being and mental health, giving you balance and among other things. So I think it's so good that you highlighted that. I'd like to we're going to transition over to our next guest, but I'd really like Christina and Kris for you to stay with us. And before we go into introducing our next guests and start the Q&A, I really just, again, if you're watching, right now or in days future, months future, ahead of time, if you've ever volunteered, and to you both as current and active volunteers, we, on behalf of Hope for the Day, cannot thank you enough for being such a core, instrumental part of our proactive suicide prevention mission. It's not enough for us to say, well, we can't do it without you, which is true. It's also a matter of, I thought we lost Christina for a second, but Christina's back.
Sorry.
No worries. It's also important to recognize that volunteering with Hope for the Day, being an agent of impact, has a lot of different facets. Doesn't matter how old you are or young you are, there's a way for you to facilitate this conversation in your community, to help raise the visibility of resources, to even if it's just educating yourself and doing everything you can to learn how you can get in touch with your own mental health, whether it's through finding therapeutic and clinical tools or finding self-care and self-love tools. That's just as much a way of volunteering with us too. Not everything has to be, in front of an audience. So I just want to extend a gigantic thank you to you, Christina and Kris, directly. I don't know if do we have a
Can we do it?
for that, Mike? Let me
Can
see
we
if
give
you got something? Oh, there you go.
But
And let's also consider that an extension to our larger volunteer Agent of Impact community as well.
Sure.
We thank
And
you.
keep watching the Instagram, because we're featuring other friendly faces from our Agents of Impact squad. So all of you, thank you from me, Carl, the whole organization.
And with that, please stay on YouTube. Please stay with us as we introduce our next guests. As I mentioned at the, pardon me?
thank you, Carl. Thank you, Mike.
No problem.
Oh,
Thank
absolutely.
You.
As I mentioned at the top of the show, we have a bit of a mailbag, and we have a couple of questions that we've taken from the community, and we're probably going to be doing this in ongoing episodes as well. And so, while Kris and Christina and Mike are going to be with us, taking the lead on this next part are our next two guests, two fabulous people who we've had interactions with as over the days at organization with their two groups, who I'm going to let them introduce themselves. First up, we have Latania Franklin, who, make sure we can hear and see. Can we see you? Can we hear you? What's up, Latania? Thank you for joining us. Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
A little bit. You get a little closer to your whatever your speaker is, your mic is.
Well, I'll just yell and I'll sit real close so y'all won't get all of me.
Perfect. Oh, that's wonderful. No, that's great. That's great for all of us. And then we've got Claudio Rivera here. Claudio, can we hear you? Can we see you?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can. We can definitely hear you now.
Excellent. Perfect.
Welcome,
You
welcome.
can hear me and see me now, right?
Yes.
Yes,
This
perfect.
is tremendous. So thank you all for joining us. We're so psyched to have you. And why don't you, Latania, introduce yourself first?
Yeah, so my name is, that's a big picture. I didn't know he was going to switch on me. So my name is Latania again, and I'm here from Sista Afya. So I started social work. I graduated from Loyola University in 2014 and walked right from Loyola and right into school social work. And I was a school social worker / dean / everything else you do in a school as a mental health professional for 5-6 years, and then left there and did I left there and walked into private practice. I do a lot of just like, okay, what's next? So I walked right into private practice, and that was a different ball game. That was last year. I was at a practice downtown. It wasn't a great fit for me, and so I left there and literally walked into Sista Afya, which is where I am now, and I love it. We see, I don't know if you wanted me to go ahead and go into what Sista Afya do. That's okay.
Yes, please do.
So Sista Afya, we see Black women that are living with a mental illness between the ages of 25 to 35. We're based on the south side of Chicago, and we do individual therapy, group therapy, as well as different workshops, wellness events. Our founder, who were founded in 2017 by Kamisha Jones, and she just does. We just started individual therapy last May, so a year. I've been with Sista Afya for a year. And we're huge on serving Black women in predominantly Black neighborhoods and providing them with community support and mental health resources.
That's beautiful. And thank you so much for joining us again. This is actually, we've done a different one of these before, but thank you so much for coming back on. And Claudio, please introduce yourself, sir.
Sure. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Claudio Rivera. I'm a psychologist over at Lurie Children's Hospital. My training and background is in both clinical psychology and community psychology. I did my training over at DePaul University here locally. I'm born and raised in Chicago, so I've been in Chicago my whole life, and take a sense of pride in how embedded and connected I am to the communities in Chicago with the rich culture and people that our city has. So just a point of pride I like to speak on whenever I do any brief intro. But as part of my training, did a lot of community-based and school-based mental health, working with children, adolescents, and their families across the city of Chicago within the public schools. And then upon completing my PhD in clinical and community psych, then began my position over at Lurie Children's Hospital, where in my time there, early on, began doing a lot of the direct treatment and care for children and families, providing therapy and services on an outpatient level, as well as early on with some of the more intensive services. And then more as of late, in the Center for Childhood Resilience that in the team that I work in, we do a lot of, our main goal is to essentially bring a lot of these best practices out into the school and community settings to make sure that children and families have access to them, particularly children and families that can't navigate a lot of the structures to go downtown to Lurie Children's Hospital, but still are deserving and can benefit from the evidence-based care that we can bring into the settings where they naturally and organically just kind of navigate. So we've been doing a lot of work in helping to build up mental health supports within our schools here in Chicago, as well as some other school districts across the state of Illinois. So that ends up being a lot of kind of what our team does. Me specifically, I have a strong interest in working in projects that are around bringing some interventions for trauma out to the public schools with adolescents, as well as doing a lot of youth voice work and trying to figure out how do we center, elevate, and validate young people in the conversation and advocacy efforts around raising mental health awareness and just overall adolescent health awareness, and then just community health more at large. So our efforts have really been around aligning with and partnering with folks that are doing that work and trying to figure out how we can bring our mental health expertise into a lot of the great efforts that are already occurring.
Thank you so much. And, you know, just because I wanted to make sure we got both of your introductions in there. Latania and Claudia, you both are doing such tremendous work, especially in areas that also intersect with people who don't necessarily have a lot of access. And before we jump into our sort of general mailbag questions, we actually had the pleasure of we had a guest who was also going to join us for this, another practitioner who was unable to join us, but did want to send in a video bite. Took me long enough to get that out. Send in a video bite that I think is a good way to sort of prompt everything that we jump into. This is Simon Weismantel from Single Point Psychotherapy. And one of the questions we're going to talk about is what happens if I can't afford therapy? And Simon put his 2 cents in there, and we'll riff on, you know, Simon's response, but also, you know, our own as well. So, Mike, I think you got that. Play that funky music.
Hello, Hope for the Day, folks. My name is Simon Weismantel. I'm a psychotherapist, and I work at Single Point Psychotherapy in Evanston, Illinois. Thanks for tuning in to Hope for the Day's broadcast today. One of the questions that came up is, what do I do if I can't afford therapy? So I want to give you 7 answers to that question that can help you get the services that you need, even if you don't have a large income or you don't have insurance. The first is to be aware of something called sliding scale or sliding fee therapists. Now, those are therapists that see people on a much reduced fee schedule, and they can do that because they are typically finishing up their education or they've just finished their education. Just like at a medical hospital, you might be seen by a resident MD. In psychology and psychotherapy, we have basically the same thing. So you may be seen by a postdoctoral or postgraduate individual who can see you sometimes for as little as $35 a session, which is greatly reduced. So it would be to your benefit to contact practices in your area and ask if they have anyone that provides sliding scale or sliding fee psychotherapy. And the second to be aware of is something called community health centers. Now, community health centers work on a different model. So they typically charge based on what your income is, what you're able to pay, rather than a flat fee that they charge everyone. And some examples around the Chicago area are Jewish Child and Family Services. There's another called Asian Human Services. So there's a bunch of those like that. And you don't necessarily have to meet those demographic criteria to go to them. That's just where they've received some of their funding. Just like at a Catholic hospital, anyone's welcome to go to a Catholic hospital for care. But these are really wonderful places. Another one would be maybe Thresholds in this area. There's another one called C4. So go ahead and Google around what community health centers are in your area. The third is something called Employee Assistance Programs, or EAPs for short. Now, this is a benefit many of us have through our workplaces, but we don't even know about. So you can ask your human resources director if that's a benefit you have. And those are typically going to give you 5 to 7 sessions, typically 100% free with a psychotherapist. So that's a great way to get started. The fourth is if you happen to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, or person living with HIV/AIDS, you can go to gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans community center, like the LGBT center called Center on Hellstad in Chicago. And each big city will have a community center like that. And that's a place where they typically have psychotherapy services. And the fifth is if recovery or addiction to drugs, alcohol, food, sex and love, emotions, any of those things are part of your story or may be part of your story or are a part of your family's history, you can use 12-step recovery resources. So that's Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon for partners and family members of. They have Gamblers Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Emotions Anonymous, Codependent Anonymous if there's troubles in relationships. So Google around and see if there's a group that fits for you. And along that same line, the sixth resource is group therapy. Group therapy can be a wonderful modality because you're getting the benefit of a therapist, but also getting the benefit of hearing from and sharing with other individuals in a similar situation. And they can be a lot cheaper, maybe $20, $25 a session. So you can check out group therapy resources in your area, and some of them are specific to group therapy for depression, group therapy for trauma, group therapy for anxiety is very popular. So those are all much more affordable resources you can check out. And if any of that is still not within reach for you financially, the last thing I would leave you with is take care of your body. Our mental health lives in our physical health. And if we're having trouble affording therapy, doing the simple things we need to do to take care of our body in terms of getting appropriate amounts of sleep, eating healthy, daily exercise, if not vigorous, just a walk, all of those things can really settle down the mind in ways that you'll find surprising. You know, abstaining from drugs and alcohol is another way that you can settle your body down. So if you take care of your body just like you would take care of a child that's in your care, you can actually do a lot to help your mental health and get yourself in a better place. So I hope that's been helpful, and I wish you safety, good care, and good mental health. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Simon.
That's awesome.
So he put a lot in there, and I would like to actually, I'm glad that he started there because this is one of the things. For instance, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, talking about the financial part of it, there's all sorts of places where that intersection is going to hit. But Latania, Sister Afya has an adjustment for that too, right? Because I think this is one of those intersectional considerations that's important to think about, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's part of our mission and vision for Sister Afya is to make sure it's affordable, because mental health shouldn't be a luxury. It should be just like if you need to go to the doctor. I think one of you guys said that everybody should have access to it. So we do. We have a sliding scale where we do take clients on sliding scale as well as insurance.
That's perfect. Now, and Claudio, is Lurie's connected with Youth Outlook, or is that a different? Because when he's talking about sort of LGBTQ plus and other communities as well, that if there's an ethnic intersection, identity and orientation, I don't know.
Right. So at Lurie Children's Hospital, we have the Department of Adolescent Medicine that then helps for any young people that are dealing with substances. We also have the gender clinic that then makes sure it's addressing those intersections that we see that are affecting the LGBTQ community. So there's a lot of the support around not only the mental health treatment, but overall care that's involved within the gender clinic for young people who identify as LGBTQ. So those intersections, when we think about intersectionality, those systems that are then pushing certain folks to the margins, we need to make sure we're accounting for and addressing those in our care, mental health care and overall health care, as it's related to whether it be homophobia, sexism, racism, classism, which I think gets to the root of the question, is how we have to be aware of the structural divide of who's able to have access to therapy and care and who's not. That awareness is key in being the first step to actually making sure we're addressing it and doing something about it.
And that's really important for folks who are listening right now, or in future days ahead. Understand, from Simon's comments, he also brought up when he was talking about community health centers, and he mentioned Asian Human Services, and Sister Afya in a way has an intersectional focus. But I'd like to expand this or bring it to a little macro discussion. Is it important, because a place like Asian Human Services in Chicago, you do not have to necessarily fit within that ethnic group to access services there, but is it relevant to have representational services? What is the relevance rather? Can someone just go see anybody? Or will that have an impact on how somebody gets care? What are your thoughts on that? I'll start with Latania.
Honestly, I think it's one. I start to smile as you were talking. Yes, I think it's important to have representation. Maybe this is not the right word, but to me, it seems like it normalizes it. Like, yes, it is okay to struggle mentally if you are, it's not a white thing or just a Black thing or Asian thing. It is a human thing. And so I definitely think it's needed. Representation is needed. What was the second part of your question?
Well, just really, is it even relevant? It's a bit of a, in a way, I don't believe it, but I think it's important for people for us to riff a little bit on the fact that it's not just because you've got the alphabet soup behind your name does not mean that you're going to be effective for everybody.
Oh yeah, no. Even I would say just because I'm Black, don't mean I'm for every Black person that wants to come to therapy. I'm not, and as a therapist, I have to tell myself that too. If clients tend to, leave or discharge without notice, I'm not for everybody. And so I think the biggest thing is cultural competency. You have some knowledge around other cultures and other traditions, just so you're coming into therapy already. Not saying you need to know everything, but some type of awareness, so you're not making the other person, for lack of a better words, feel uncomfortable or feel like they're being judged. You just need those things. And I think many people go see therapists that look like them so they can feel comfortable, because going to therapy, period, is hard. I mean, to expose yourself and to be that vulnerable, that's difficult on a regular day. So, I mean, your first choice, and that was mine, to go see someone that looks like you.
That's great. Claudia, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think representation matters. I think I kind of on the surface, a lot of the points Latania was saying, when someone comes in and they see somebody that looks like them, there's a potential for there to be a rapport connection built, right? So I think that's very important. I think we also recognize that the way we identify and the community that we identify with are just one thing that we want to consider. But my recommendation when someone is going to go in to seek therapy is that they essentially ask their therapist what is their like orientation or paradigm that they bring to this. Because if they are from your same group and you feel comfortable with that, that's a plus, that's a bonus. But we also don't want to make assumptions that they maybe share certain perspectives. But I think certain questions are like, what is your orientation, your paradigm? You can even ask them like, if you are more systems oriented, you can bring that up and say like, how do you incorporate systems into your therapy? Or you can ask other questions like, do you provide queer affirming therapy? Or do you have any experience working with folks who are of undocumented status? So some of those specific questions to get at though somebody may pertain to a particular group or identity, we want to dig a little deeper and then say, how can this be meaningful and tailored to your experience? I think it's very important that representation is there because we need a diverse workforce. We need to make sure that the healers and the caregivers are not representing just one monolith, one group. We want to make sure that there's diversity because that adds to a wealth of experience and care that we can provide to just everyone at large. I think that's very important. But I think it's important to also explore what are people's like paradigms and approaches to this, like in terms of like, is it justice oriented, and some of those things that really can help provide care for those folks that have been more positioned to the margin.
That's so important for people to understand, is representation can sound like it's a word, a sort of a flavor of the month kind of word, it's a zeitgeisty kind of buzzword right now, but it's important for everyone who's sort of listening right now, watching right now, or in the future to understand that representation does not just mean people of color. It does not just mean talking about people who might have disruptions or conflicts inside of gender identity or the sexual orientation. If you were, for instance, this also means being able to feel comfortable with connecting. A situation that we've seen very consistently that's come through our DMs, for instance, someone will identify they're an older male, and there might be private practice resources available to them, but it's someone who's maybe younger than them. And they don't feel comfortable with that, but are they wrong for saying that? Someone who the only access they have, or the most visible access they have, is to a clinician who maybe is male and they're female and they don't feel comfortable with that relationship, or vice versa. They're male and they prefer to talk to someone who else identifies as male. And I think it's important for people to understand that when it comes to mental health professionals, one of the things stigma does is makes us think like, one, there's a magic wand, which is BS. But two, we forget like you have the right to advocate for what you need, and bedside manner is a big part of that. So getting comfortable with a clinician is your right. This is something I think especially is important for youth to hear, because you might be in a position where maybe you've been brought to someone by your guardians, whether they're parents or through other sort of levels of network. And there's definitely some tricky spots that come with this. But the fact is that just because you're connected with someone and just because they're a clinician, and even if you've been ordered to sit in front of them, that does not mean they're going to be effective for you. And that doesn't mean clinical therapy is bunk. And that does not mean you are hopeless if this individual doesn't connect. And if you've been listening to what Latania and Claudio has been saying, that's right underscoring that. And I'm kind of talking about this right here because we want to get to a whole bunch of questions, but we're also literally running out of time.
Hey, can I just add, somebody on the live stream on YouTube said, I'm a Black woman who needed a Black woman therapist. There are cultural connections made within our sessions that I have never gotten with other therapists. So I think it's an individual thing. Like for me, I originally saw an older white man, reminded me of my grandpa, Italian guy, made me feel comfortable. But now my maintenance, like going to see my professional to keep me well, it happens to be a Black woman. So, we have great rapport, and that's why I like her. She holds me accountable. She's like, she's always like, you sound like you're doing a lot for other people, like reminding me that I also have to practice self-love and self-care. So, but yeah, thank you for sharing, live stream audience.
Yes, absolutely. And this is kind of like, I warned about this at the start of the show. We're never able to get the whole conversation, you know, all the bits and pieces, but I don't want to overrun our time and I want to respect everyone's time. We do have a whole list of questions that one of the things.
Fire one off?
Well, I think what we can do is, let's do one more question.
Okay.
And what we'll have to do is, Claudio and Latania, we're going to have to get you back on time. And we may have to just do a standalone. It may not even be on Thursday. We might just do a standalone 100% QA thing so that we can just talk our heads off as well.
I mean, I think the time we spent on that one question was necessary. It's such a big question, you know what I mean? So, and
I would before we I would not be doing my job if I don't also mention affordability. Number one, just to underscore what Simon said, what Latania said, what Claudio has talked about. If you are straight out of low cash, zero in the bank account, that does not have to be a barrier for you to get help. That does not mean that there's an easy fast track to it, but there are resources, tools, and solutions. And your challenges are not hopeless. You need to understand that one of the ways you can start that, if you have access to an internet connection, is going to Hope for the Day's resource compass. And starting there are specific sub options for cost adjusted services. And Mike, before you go to your question, I think another thing to let people know about that I want to put out to our clinicians in group is, Simon prompted us with talking about clinical level therapy and supports. But is that the only type of mental health support out there? Could somebody find a value out of a non-clinical support group? And so to answer that question, would one of you, Latania or Claudio, feel comfortable talking about what's the difference between group therapy and a support group? Because 12-step may not be for everyone. There's, what is it, SMART? There's there's a 12-step alternative, like, and I think it's called SMART. I'll have to Google it, but what's the difference between like a clinical support group and like a general support group? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
Did you want to jump in, Latania, or?
You said the difference between a clinical support group and, like, you said it's just like a regular support group?
What's the difference between?
I would say, and you can jump in at any time, but I would say like a non-clinical support group is a group that can be facilitated by a non-clinician, one. And two, it could just be a safe space for everybody to a safe space for everybody to hold space for one another. Because sometimes you don't, like I think you said earlier, like you don't necessarily, people sometimes think when you come to therapy, like you're gonna get a diagnosis or like you need to have medication. Like, no. Like you don't, like you may just want, I have what I consider myself sometimes I call my therapist a human diary. Like you just want somebody to hold space with you so you can talk about what you are experiencing. And I think non-clinical groups can do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great description. I agree. And I think like a non-clinical support group, I think that's just kind of organically, like when you're seeking social support, that you're getting that is just happening in a group-based format, more structured, more intentional. And you see that actually, as communities, as a people, that's how people have gotten through generations over time, right? Before we like professionalize the entire field. So I think some of those things are just natural supports that are very organic that we need, and actually are the things that carry us on a day-to-day basis, because if we're lucky enough to have access to therapy, we know we're going there once a week for less than an hour session, but we know the real work happens in between those sessions, right? And I think maybe if there's the additional component that is added within being in group therapy is that you likely would have had, or you should have had some sort of a formal assessment that then would have, provided a diagnosis or at least a problem or concern area that's going to be the focus of that particular group, that then would lay out kind of a course of treatment. And then you have access to that mental health professional or that clinician. So if a crisis emerges or, a safety response is needed, that then they can do that risk assessment, connect you with a higher level of care if needed. So I would say that's probably the distinction there, is that, but I would encourage if folks, like the more support we can wrap around ourselves, the better. And I think those organic social supports are the ones that really help us make us human. It's the things that we've always relied on. So I think that to me is where a lot of the richness and the strength and power comes from. But again, group therapy can be a very beautiful and wonderful thing. I would just say it's very targeted, very focused on, say, group therapy for depression or trauma or, anxiety, whatever it may be that you're struggling with. While I think a support group that led by a non-clinician can be more organic, where it can be free-flowing and more open.
And the only thing I will add to that is like there's certain groups for certain things, so you can probably for Chicago, there's the app Meetup. Where it's literally for you to join different groups. I even started a group on there for Black therapists. So you can, if you don't see one that you like, you can go ahead and create one. So yeah, there's groups what you really want is people of shared interests, which can also be said for therapeutic groups, of shared interests where you feel comfortable and supported, and you can talk about whatever you need to in that group.
That's such a perfect illustration. And apparently, and big fans of holding the space. It's a great phrase. I love that. We're at a point where I think we can probably get in one more question that I kind of want to put to the whole crew here. Mike, did you pick one? I think I might have one. That
I was just thinking of the first one, or I know that you like asking the question about.
Well, I will ask about that too, but that's more of a personal question. Yeah, so I would want to, let's just close out on the accessibility part. I think that spending time on that is excellent part. That again, starting that conversation for what can I afford if you don't know anywhere else to go. You can start at hftd.org and use the resource compass as a conversation starter. I would be remiss to mention one of our other partners in prevention, DBSA, the Depression, Bipolar, and Support Alliance. They offer online versions of support groups, 7 days, all 7 days. They have a different variant of support group, different population demographics and whatnot, and you can log in and register and reserve a spot in those groups. And when we get back to a time where we can really gather together person to person, they host and facilitate support groups across the country for free. And I bring that up at this point before we transition to another question, because sometimes the mental health discussion, as Kris and Christina were talking about with starting a conversation for ourselves, sometimes it can be so difficult that you kind of have to baby step your way in. And even the idea of booking an appointment to see a clinician can be so intimidating that you want to take it a lower grade. And going to a support group where you can walk in and walk out whenever you want, don't have to sign up. You would likely have to keep the confidence, don't take pictures when you're in there, whatever. Can be a way to do it. And just sitting in the back in a place where they're not going to ask you to even introduce your name, and you just hear other people sharing and connecting. Sometimes that's what it takes. It could take 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings. And then you decide, well, maybe this is going to be for me, or maybe I'll try something more direct one-on-one. I hope as you're listening to this, you understand what we're trying to pile drive home is that starting the conversation will look different for everybody. And if it takes inches at a time, that's progress, and that's absolutely critical, because prevention of harm and more detrimental things to our well-being starts with that conversation. So, again, Latania and Claudio, and of course, Simon and Power Spirit.
Hell yeah.
Thank you for those parts. And I have a closeout question, but the community question I wanted to ask first was, something that we get submitted to us a lot. And we're always happy to answer it. And our social media and communications team is happy to answer this. How do you know if your friends will be supportive if you've got a mental health challenge? Because the fact is in a lot of ways, stigma can rule everything around us, dollar bill, y'all. And it can be enough that our friends aren't walking around making fun or dismissing mental health, but we could just have it in our minds that, like, if I say something, they're going to think I'm weak, or they're going to think I'm a wuss, or they're going to think I'm weird, or they're going to exclude me. So how do we know if our friends are be supportive? This isn't an easy question, but who wants to take a jump at it first? I think there's a lot of different ways to go with this. Who's
Yeah.
Claudio? We got Claudio. All right, Claudio, stepping up.
Sure. I can go first, but look forward to other people's input as well. I think when we think about, like, how will our friends be supportive, and I just think about, like, just supportive, stable, safe relationships in general, right? Like, what do those look like? And I think we have to ask ourselves, like, how do we define those? What are the characteristics we're looking for? And once we're able to define what that is for us, it can then allow us to recognize, is this a person that I can confide this in, and share private information about myself, my health, my well-being. I'm reminded about one definition of what a supportive and a loving relationship is look like. It's Bell Hooks in her writing All About Love talks about, like, how for love and support to be present, it needs care, affection, respect, recognition, commitment, and trust. And, like, that's the recipe for a loving, supportive relationship. So I think you can think about how all of those may apply to you in terms of what a supportive relationship is, and being able to then say, like, yeah, I think this is a person that if I share something very vulnerable and private about myself, that I think they're gonna respond with respect and trust and recognition, and some of those things that they validate. So I think that is the first step is identifying what is a safe, supportive relationship for you. Because we got friends that we know we can go really deep and get into some real stuff with, and other friends who are just like, we're just gonna go play ball together, but I may not share everything with you because for one reason or another, right? And then that's cool, that's okay. And then after that, once you're able to identify those safe, supportive people, be it friends, romantic partners, family, whatever it may be, I think the next step is then, if you feel that you can approach them, is asking them if they are available and able to, like, listen and be supportive, and if so, in what ways? So, like, will they be a listener? Will they want to be a problem solver for you? Will they provide tangible resources or support for you? I think having some of those expectations communicated when we're going to reach out to friends or any loved ones about asking for help and support is identifying, like, what does that help and support look like? So that way we can also set healthy boundaries for them and not expect them to support in all the ways. And we know that the best way to get support is not just to rely on, like, one friend who's going to do it all for us or one supportive person, but to hopefully wrap a village around us of different people that can provide support in different ways, and hoping that it's also interdependent in a way that then we're able to contribute and provide support to others as well.
Well said. Thank you, Claudia. Did anyone else want to, how would you gauge if your friends would be supportive? Or might suggest? Latania? Okay.
Go ahead, Latania.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I agree with everything that has already been said. Like, I was, like, secretly snapping because I think the only thing, which I don't think is an ad, but more or less, like, once you, like, definitely first step is defining, like, what you need to feel supported, like, how can someone support you, but also, like, teach other people around you how to support you. So, like, if you are going through something, like, asking, like you said, like, asking them, like, would they be willing to help, and let them know, like, a lot of times people shy away from mental health, or, like, even if someone is crying because they don't know what to do. It's like, oh God, they're crying. What is it? And when that it helps when that happens, like it helps for other people to know like what you need. So if it's a hug, if it's just someone to talk to, like let them know, be very specific about what you need so they'll know what to do. And then for those friends that may be listening, like, I'm not that person, it's okay not to be that person. Like you don't have to be. Sitting on that side is hard. And I can say as a therapist, sometimes I don't always want to sit on that time. And that's where vacation comes in there, because you need a break like that. It's heavy. It's heavy work to hold someone else's emotions as well as your own if you have any. So no, it's okay not to be that person, but also the person that needs someone, let them know exactly what you need.
It's important. Kris, Lily, you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, being around high school students pretty much my whole day, every day, friendships are so huge with them, and making sure that everyone, they feel like they have to have everybody liking them a lot of times. And I kind of break it down. When we talk, we actually go over Erickson's stages of development. And I say, as an adolescent, you're supposed to be going through this confusing role of your life. And I always tell them, take a look at your ID, and it's last year's picture. And they flip it over. And I go, are you the same person you were last year? No, not at all. And they like get embarrassed by their picture. And I'm like, now look at all the people that you probably lost since junior high up to sophomore year. Like, you don't have the same group of friends. The people that are still with you are the ones that you're going to trust. And you're probably going to leave high school with maybe only the ones you can count on one hand. And like Claudio said, I really like that with supporting with a village. Every one of those friends are going to have a different role in your life. And you may only have that one friend that you really can open up to about this. But the friendship part of it is so important to them and to everybody. I mean, we need that social health aspect of our life, but I could see where that's a big fear, and I just like the way you guys both put the different perspectives in there and agreeing together. But I see it all the time with them, and they don't understand. Like Latania was saying, they're not listening to me when I'm telling them. That's not their role. They don't want to hear that. Maybe that's too heavy for them. So being upfront and getting that perspective of what is your role with me as my friend when it comes to this is huge. So I definitely something I'm taking away from that and carrying into my classroom. So
great point. One of the things that I think people should draw away from this, especially with this idea of how do you know if your friends will be supportive. I think there's a bit of like a marketplace on the idea of like creating virtuous individuals. So we believe it's supposed to be a composite that like we're all supportive, we're all there. And if you don't have that, so there's that one side, but there's also, if you don't have that, there's something deficient or defunct in your background, that you don't have the go-to friends. And the fact is unfortunately, because of stigmas around mental health and also human beings' natural capacity, it can be a privilege to have supportive individuals. And it can be very impactful on someone's mental health if they look around them and they feel like they have no one to talk to. One of the reasons Hope for the Day exists and has excelled is because it's oftentimes easier for someone to send a DM to us that's, in a way, an organization they're familiar with a stranger, as opposed to talking to someone who's in the physical space because they don't feel safe about it. And so there's the two sort of things to think about. You look around you and you feel alone, even though you might be able to see that there's people you interact with, or you do actually physiologically recognize you're not really connected to anyone. Finding friends and making those connections is, again, it's not a commodity. It's not something that we automatically are going to be plugged into, having a bunch of friends and things like that. But it's very easy for your self-esteem to be dramatically impacted by that. And that's the first thing I sort of want to put on that. For all the folks who always ask, how will I know if my friends will be supportive? Well, if you feel that you do have a network around you, a physical network around you, so answering for those people, and you look around them and you don't know, I think that it's okay to trust your gut. I think that if you're 14, if you're 20, if you're 40, and you look around the people at you and feel like they may not necessarily understand, it wouldn't be their fault. It's not that they're criminal. We don't normalize mental health. We don't talk about it. We don't educate on it. And so might be scary because you think they don't have any sort of wherewithal to respond to you. Again, that's why people like Over the Day, that's why professional clinical services exist, because if we could address our mental health, just with our friends and just with like the people that we work with and, are going out on the weekends, buddies, whatever that might look like, then you wouldn't need to have the infrastructure for mental health, like a clinical mental health level, because you could diagnose, you could care for, you could heal, you could recover, you could build tools. But the fact is that that's not true. And that's a big windup for me to say that the best way to tell if your friends are going to be supportive is to think of it like this. The best role you can be supportive to another person is a teammate. And we use this at Hope for the Day when we say teammate, because we mean it in the real mechanical sense. A teammate is not above or below. A teammate, we're eye to eye. We're together. And you can be coming from different places. As teammates, there might be a bridge between you. And sometimes you would hope you're going to meet in the middle, but it may require you have to come a little bit over to their side more, and they may have to come a little bit over to your side more based on professional responsibilities, economic realities, whatever. And that's part of the whole relationship, is that bridge in between. And so how do you tell if a friend is supportive or not? If you've listened to what Claudio said, listen to what Latania said, listen to what Kris has said, look at the bridge between the people who are around you. If you can envision them making an effort to meet you in the middle or coming a little bit over to your side as you share something, then go with that. Try it. They may not have the words. It's not somebody's job to have all the answers, but if they're willing to listen to you, that's the best way. Just assess, like, do I think this person will meet me? And you can also answer that by, would you meet them? Would you meet them in the middle or go across closer to them to support? If you do that for them, it may not always add up, but that's probably the healthiest way to sort of visualize in your mind, because we get that question a lot, and it isn't just 13-year-olds in a junior high. It's adults, it's people who are married, it's professionals, people recently unemployed, people who are in the military, people who live in rural areas, urban areas, suburban areas, who ask about, like, how do I know if the people around me I can talk to? So that's just really the important thing, is if you listen to what's being said, it is a gut check. It's okay to reach out to people beyond your network. It doesn't make you weird, broken, or deficient as a human being. But if you want to open up to someone around you, the best way is to sort of think of that teammate level and measure for that bridge. If you believe that they would meet you in the middle or go away, take a chance. It's okay not to be okay, and let's be honest, let's not sugarcoat it. I say they laugh at you. That hurts, right? It hurts, and they don't understand. But that misunderstanding oftentimes is ignorance. They don't understand the mental health part. That doesn't mean what you're going through is any less or that is a really loud car horn. I have a really good microphone too, but
You're experiencing a angry driver out there.
So I can't thank you all enough for giving us your insight. We're gonna have to definitely make a dedicated mailbag questions. We covered a lot of great stuff today. The question I want to leave off with everyone, and I would like to hear from everyone if you feel comfortable, is right now we're all experiencing a collective sort of impact. Something that makes us, I swear.
Would you like me to ask?
I don't know what it is. Yeah, Mike, ask the question.
We want to know, with the current reality being what it is, there are some silver linings, and there are some things that we're like, oh, wow, when we get to whatever's next, that new reality that comes next, what do we want to leave behind, and what do we want to take with us from, kind of the perspective that this global pandemic has given us?
Yeah, so that can be like a dual thing. It can be like, what do you leave behind? What do you bring with you? It can just be one thing I'm going to leave, or one thing I'm bringing with me. Take it as you feel it. Who would like to jump in there?
I'm going to jump in.
Go on, Kris.
All right. So being in the bike industry and all that, man, I'm just hoping that this is just not a fluke and people start getting more active as they've been. You look outside, you see people walking, you see people riding bikes. I've seen pictures from Target with those shelves just empty of bicycles. Bike shops, they're saying they're at their June and July numbers already with repairs and with sales. So people are connecting, with family. They're social distancing with friends, but like they're forgetting, they're starting to drop the busyness of every day to just connect, and that's such an important thing. Whether it's through a Zoom like we're doing now, or once this is all lifted and we can actually be physical together, I hope it doesn't go back to people just sitting behind a computer again and forgetting that the physical aspect of it is so important, because people are dying just to get outside and take a quick walk or go on a bike ride. And you see it every day when you look outside. So I'm hoping that's something that becomes the normal and that we slow down. So.
What you got, Christina?
Just kind of to piggyback off of that, I'm like a marketing director. That's like my job that I do every day. So I find myself on social media a lot, not only during like work hours, but also, just mindlessly going to different apps like Instagram, Facebook, and everything, just because, when you're bored, that's like what your mind goes to. It's just like endlessly scrolling. And then, time goes by and you realize you've been on like your phone for like 45 minutes, which is crazy. So just kind of like with this whole quarantining and everything, I've just been trying to find different ways to kind of engage my mind, rekindle like things that I've used to be super into. Like I've been doing a lot of reading, a lot of, drawing and everything, just finding different ways to like kind of, stay busy, but also stay away from my screen, because, working from home, we're all on our screens now too. So that's kind of a little bit more overwhelming than usual. So just, trying to stay away from it as much as possible. I think is something that I'd really like to bring into my life more after all of this. And again, like Kris had said, going outside, you see like so many people that you didn't even know like went out or anything from their houses, but everybody's like just killing to like get outside and be active because they're sick of staring at the same four walls every day. So I think just, being able to get active and finding different things that pique your interest that doesn't involve being online or anything.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Christina. Who wants to go next?
A little bit more personal. I don't think I realized like how much of my mom, if she listened, would probably be like, girl, you lying, but I'm not. I didn't realize like how much of an outside person I was, like just the social aspect of like going to see family or just going to visit my niece. Like I missed that so bad. And so like I could think I've been in the house for 2 months, so it's just like I could think back to like the end of last year and going into January, just like, I'd rather just stay in the house. So, I could see them next week, but now there is no next week. And so it's just like when I have those thoughts, like after this whole thing, it's just like I'm going outside. Like I don't care if my curl ain't right, if my nails ain't fixed. Like I'm going, I don't care because there was a time where I couldn't, and it didn't feel good. And I can honestly say I didn't realize that till now.
And that's great. That's that's a really powerful thing to recognize, and the sense of the time is fleeting a little bit. What's the word? Ephemeral? The ephemeralness?
Ephemeral?
Ephemeral.
I think that's the word.
Trying to add $6 words, as we go along. So thank you very much, Latania. That was beautiful.
Beautiful.
What else we got? Claudio.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that because it attends to something that like that collective trauma that is real that we're all going through. And I love hearing everybody's individual kind of ideas for reimagining and their outlets and their passion, because I think that reimagining of trying to do things differently or carrying certain things forth, I think shows that we recognize we're at a pivotal point where we can reimagine the world differently. And I think if there's anything like from a collective trauma, just to describe kind of the way I make sense of what a collective trauma is, that it's the thing that is affecting all of us, but like an individual trauma or any other traumatic experience, it affects us all differently. What is similar of an individual traumatic event and a collective trauma is that there are lasting, lingering effects from a collective trauma that is also seen in individual trauma, but it is experienced differently in the sense that there are some of our communities that are being more impacted by this collective trauma. Some of them are being more, like the way they have been marginalized is now being further exacerbated. So if there's one thing I think that I'd love to leave behind collectively, so like kind of our collective response to a collective trauma is to reorganize, reimagine our society in a way where we're centering, validating, listening to, and elevating those folks that have been for a long time making efforts and telling us how the way our society was organized prior to this was already inequitable and unfair, and we needed to do something about that. And this is only helping to highlight that. And we know these collective traumas have a possibility of lingering for generations because of what other collective traumas from the past have taught us, like the legacy of enslavement and land theft and genocide. Those things are still lingering today. So if there's one thing we can do is, I would hope we move forward with a collective response about ways to then to make sure we're centering those most marginalized folks. And I think if I could like then channel that to like something to do for each of us individually is to continue to find those forms of joy. Like, what are the joys that we engage in? Like whether it be the bike riding, the art, the music, dancing, any of those things, of being out in nature, any of those things that are joyful and that are particularly rooted in our customs and traditions that have survived and withstood the test of time, that have been passed down to us and that we will then continue to pass down to future generations, and engage in forms of intentional joy and radical hope. And radical hope meaning that hope that includes a resistance and being action-minded. And I just came across a quote I was reminded of Arundhati Roy, and she helped describe this kind of point where we are in the world right now, where it's kind of, well, her quote was that another world is not only possible, she is on her way. She said, and on a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. And to me, that resonated with how we're on the precipice of something new. And it captures the idea of radical hope and healing that I'm aspiring to practice, and I hope we can practice collectively.
Gave me a chill, man. You gave me a chill.
This is beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much, Claudio. That was phenomenal. And before I close out, Mike, do you have an answer for your part?
Well, I answered last week. This week, I guess it's a little different, you know. It's this constant evolution. I just I found that earlier this week, I kind of hit a wall, and it kind of all hit me at once, where I've been pretty positive and been able to maintain a pretty, you know, good outlook on things and not get my head in the gutter. But, you know, Monday, Tuesday rolled around, I felt myself doing the same old guilt and shame. Like, what are you upset about? You still are gainfully employed. You're still able to work full time from home. So many other people aren't in that situation. What's your problem? You know, like, and then I'd be like, wait, what are you doing, man? Like, this is you've grown past this. You've worked on this. Remind yourself of your coping skills, your strategies, your valves. Let's get back on that, you know, reminding ourselves it's okay right now. I'm going to be sad. I'm going to grieve things that I'm missing, and I'm sad that, you know, we're missing out on together. You know, I had a show that was booked for last Friday, and I guess at the time I was like, oh, you know, it's okay. But come Monday, I was like, man, I really needed that outlet of performing with my friends in my band and having that release. And we had our 5-year anniversary, me and my partner, and we made it as special as we could, but we were also like, damn, because we were supposed to be on vacation. So I'm trying to leave that behind, and but also remember that this is going to come up again numerous times for me before this is over, and that it's okay that I'm reminding myself of the old me so that I can continue to work on the new me, you know, the one that's being proactive and allowing me to have those feelings, and rather than suppress them and push them down or beat myself up about them, I'm going to let them rise up. I'm going to sit in them for a little bit. I'm going to try and sort them out so I can leave them on the table and go forwards. You know what I mean? So.
Thank you, Mike. And that's gonna wrap up Conversations Cafe today. And before we close out with a video, and I'll thank our guests, but I want everyone who's listening right now, watching or engaging this in future days and weeks and beyond, you know, rewind this and really take heart to some of the great content that's been put on here today. What we're hearing, and I want to piggyback basically off of what Claudio sort of helped close out with us today. When we talk about bringing into the new, right now, in our shared collective experience, there's an old phrase, like a sociological phrase, where some people are like, well, they were like, you know, people use like very grim events like 9/11 or Pearl Harbor and to describe, well, there's a moment. But there's also another moment that you'll start to see in the news a lot more because it correlates to science. But I want to talk about us as the human psyche. And that's the phrase, the Sputnik Moment. And I'm not going to go into the history, but you just Google it. You'll see responses. But Sputnik Moment usually correlates to a moment where basically a whole bunch of people at once say, ish has got to change. And when you talk about Sputnik Moment, it's typically it's looking at what is perceived as a negative and looking to a positive. If we think of like disasters, that's usually a pain response. Well, we can all be in different variations of pain right now. We could all be in different variations of discomfort, but we are in what is collectively a negative. And we don't want to BS ourselves or fill ourselves with a false, you know, perspective. But the fact is that we can look forward with a positive mindset or a negative mindset. And when we talk about a Sputnik Moment, it's to recognize our deficiencies and be inspired by the opportunity to improve and better ourselves. And my Into the Now is part of a continuation of what was from before, which is something that Kris and Christina talked about, and something that when talking about accessing services through mental health that we heard from Simon and further elaborated on through Latania and Claudio, is really about taking my own mental health and well-being seriously. It's very easy to put myself on the bench and say I'm going to care for others. I'm going to do work to satisfy demands, to support organizations, to support a company, to support these other things. We're conditioned. And when, Kris, you were talking about slowing down, I think one of the big things that we have in our world is that we're not just conditioned to be like consumers or whatever, we're conditioned to take ourselves and give out and go and attain outbound. And one of the biggest byproducts of that, I think, is that we might say buying products is our priority, but our self is not a priority. And Claudio, listening to your amazing words is really just further isolates this for me, that one of the things I really want to bring into the newness is, and it's matching with Kris, is not looking at myself by relating or measuring externally and finding the value of, am I healthy, am I happy, am I okay, based on my job, or, you know, am I high functioning? You know, I see a lot of this with the social media, like right now, where like people are doing 30-day challenges, yoga challenges, sewing challenges, things. And it's great, especially if you need to be physically active to get your quality of life. But at the same time, I find myself being like, bro, I moved from like the couch to the other couch. I was good, and I washed the dishes inside of 3 days. I had that going for me. And yeah, so it's really just finding not just your worth, because I don't even want to use the word worth and talk about it like capitalism. I mean, finding myself and like what I really value about myself, just because my mental health won't improve and get stable if I don't actually slow down and say, you know what? You don't actually have to break your back every single day you know, if it takes you 2 days to get the task done instead of 1 day, that's what it's going to be. And that slowing down and sharing the collective, I think it all just sort of, that's where I'm at. And I want folks who are paying attention to this, watching, listening at any point right now or later on, to think about the great words and the wise insights that you've heard from our guests today, and ask yourself those questions. What's something that I could be taking with me into this new world that is about focusing on investing in my better well-being? What does that mean? What does that look like? What do I have to leave behind to prioritize my own well-being and get balanced and be that much more supportive to my community? So Kris Lundgren, Christina Bravo, Latania Franklin, Claudio Rivera, thank you so much, as always, for being amazing guests. Thank you for your contributions and intersections and interactions with Hope for the Day in your individual ways. Claudio and Latania, thank you for your service and work out in the community. Kris and Christina, thank you so much for your contributions, both as private citizens and agents of impact. And of course, Conversations Cafe would not be able to happen without the homie you can see on the screen, Mike Benopel. Somebody you can't see on the screen, Rick Ozowski, someone who may not be visible, and Vicky Cisnet, and really the whole Hope of the Day production team. But Mike's going to take us out and leave some videos. So again, thank you, everyone. I hope you all have a great night.
Thanks,
you
Carl.
too.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Say we do this again sometime, huh?
Sir.
Here we go.
Shane, Hurricane Helms. I'm here with Nate. Hope for the Day. We want to talk a little bit about mental health, right? There's a stigma. Asking for help means you're weak. Absolutely incorrect. One of the strongest, most powerful things you can do is just ask someone for help. If you need help, don't feel ashamed, because we all do. Mental health is your responsibility as well. We all need help sometimes. And if not, what's up with that?
What up? Ortiz Santana here, and we got a message, baby.
Yo, as someone who personally deals with anxiety and depression myself, I know it's not something that a lot of people like to speak about and that a lot of people are open about, but just know that you're not alone, and just keep striving and moving forward. Siempre pa'lante. That's our motto, man. Just if never hesitate to reach out to someone, never hesitate to just be you. Just be you and be proud of being you.
Always be proud, because when you're proud, you're powerful. Yeah, pun intended.
Hello. We are best friends from AEW Pro Wrestling TNT Dynamite Wednesday nights. We're here to talk about.
We're talking about breaking stigma for Hope for the Day, because, Greg, tell them.
If you need help, get help. And if you see a best friend who might need help, talk to him. Help him out.
Hey, I'm Marty DeRosa.
I'm Sarah Shockey.
And we're here to say that it's okay to not be okay. As somebody who's battled depression all my life and had, a whole bunch of challenge and stuff go down, I think that one of the best things I ever did was reaching out for help. I have the best therapist on the planet. I am now living, I think, my best life, I would have to say. And what about you, Sarah? What do you think?
I think that it's really important to know that mental health, your emotional state, it's so similar to your muscles. You want to build them up. If they get hurt, you need time to process that and to heal the injury. So even if you don't feel like you have mental health issues, know that it's okay to take breaks. It's okay not to be okay. And it's okay to just take stock on yourself and take good care of yourself.
Yeah, and you're never a burden to the people around you. The depression wants you to think you are and wants you to be alone. But trust me, reach out to people, surround yourself with positive people, get into something. We love pro wrestling, whatever it is you're into, get into it. I guarantee there's a whole bunch of other people who feel exactly the same way you do. You can share that passion with them. And when you need somebody to lean on, you can lean on them.
Love you guys.